For consideration this evening, we ask you to think of 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 8 through 11. There is a story there that is relevant to our lives. It might be an old story, but it's not antiquated, it's not outdated, and it certainly has relevance for us. Again, that's 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 8 through 11. If you have watched the news today, you are aware that today is a significant day in history. Not just women's history, but today is a significant day in history. For on August 18th, 1920, women gained the right to vote. In retrospect, it seems as if it were a no-brainer that women should have the right to vote. But the women's suffrage movement went on for a number of years and was a hard-fought movement. One of the things that we consider in this day is a little-known person who is responsible for casting the deciding vote. At that time, there were 48 states. Alaska and Hawaii had not yet been added. And according to the Constitution, to ratify the Constitution, adding amendments, things of that nature, requires a 2/3 majority of the states to be in agreement. 36 states were needed, and they were at 35. Tennessee seemed to be the state that offered hope for putting them on the map for getting the vote that was needed. The senator by the name of Harry T. Burn cast the deciding vote. Harry was the youngest person elected to the Tennessee General Assembly at age 22. At age 24 was when this vote came up about agreeing to vote in favor of women's rights to vote. He did not know how he was going to vote because personally he was in favor of voting for women's rights to vote. But as his party, the Republican Party, was against the issue, and he was being pressured by party officials to vote against it. What is interesting is the real hero or heroine of the story is a lady by the name of Febb, F-E-B-B, Ensminger Burn. She was actually Harry's mother, and she wrote Harry a letter, and in that letter she said to her son, "My boy, do the right thing." He put that letter in his pocket. When it came time to vote, the vote was 48 to 48 in the Tennessee General Assembly. Because of the pressure of his party and not wanting to disappoint his political allies, he tried twice to table the vote, but delaying what needs to be done does not stop the inevitable. After he was not allowed to stop the vote, the House Speaker demanded that he make his vote. And he was going to vote with his party until he went in his pocket and pulled out the letter from his mother which said, "Son, do the right thing." And he voted and cast the vote that was the deciding vote and the reason why women today have the right to vote. This did not go over well with both his allies and those who were against women having the right to vote. Some called into question his integrity. Some accused him of bribery to the extent that a grand jury was convened and he was investigated to see if he had been bribed, but no charges were brought as no evidence surfaced. When asked about this, he inserted in the House Journal his reason for voting in favor. He said, I know that a mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for the ratification. This tells us something positive, not just about mothers, but it also tells us something about individuals who hold influence on others. We have to be very careful about how we use our influence, and we have to be careful about who we allow to influence us. In 1 Kings chapter 12, there is the story of Rehoboam who rises to the kingdom to lead the people of Israel. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, and in his rise to the kingdom, he consulted with the older people, but according to verse number 8, he forsook their counsel, but he consulted with the young men who were grown up with him. In other words, he did not listen to wiser, smarter, more spiritual people. He allowed himself to bow to peer pressure and associated with those who he grew up with. And as a result of this, he made decisions that caused the kingdom to be split. And that's how we got the two different kingdoms under the administration of Rehoboam. God's kingdom was split, his earthly kingdom, that is. What we have to understand from this is that we learn so much about influencing people and being influenced by people. We have to be careful how we use our influence, because we will one day have to stand before God and give an account for how we have handled whatsoever he has given to us. Many people think the only thing that people will account for is money and whether or not they managed or mismanaged God's money. But whatsoever God allows you to be a steward over, whether it's money, your talents, your treasures, your temple, your testimony, your influence, each of us must stand before him and answer for how did we use that influence. So do we use our influence to encourage other people to better behavior, or do we use that influence to encourage people to sinister behavior? And then we have to also think about who we are influenced by and what they have the ability to get us to do or not to do. Everyone is influenced by someone. Maybe to some degree you are more or less influenced than most people, but to assume that you are not influenced by anyone is certainly a fallacy, because there is someone who can get in your head, who can whisper in your ear, who can make a suggestive thought that causes you to change your mind or to go in a particular direction. As we think about who influences us, we would do well to think about the heart or the character of that person. We must be careful that we do not make the mistake of Rehoboam and allow ourselves to be influenced by people who themselves have compromised their character. If they don't care for being a better person, why would they care about the decisions they influence us to make? Then we have to also think about the credibility of a person who's trying to influence us. One of the things that we have to be careful about in that are individuals who have sinister motives and agendas that are not consistent with godliness, morality, ethics, and otherwise common sense. And we have to also ask ourselves, will the person share in the consequences of these choices? People can always encourage you to do this or to do that, but when you have to suffer as a result of that choice, when the price has to be paid, are they willing to share in that with you? I have learned in life, unfortunately, that there are many people who want to give you advice, even if you don't want their advice. But where are they coming from? What type of character do they have? Are they credible? Do they have a motive? Are they right with God? Do they have my best interests at heart? Are they saying this to attach themselves to me because of some perceived ascension that allows them in their lives? We have to be careful about influence. It is neither right nor wrong to have influence or to be influenced. It is how you use it. A person who is influencing you to do good, who is admonishing you, who is exhorting you, a person who is encouraging you, certainly that's the type of influence we need in our lives. I challenge you to think about your social circle. Who do you have influence over? Be careful what you say. Be careful how you act because you may impact someone else. As an example, over the years, I have known people who have wanted their spouse or their children or grandchildren to become baptized members of the church. But when you talk to those individuals, you discover that when their spouse or parent comes home from church, they're talking about the preacher, they're talking about the members, they're gossiping, they're bringing politics home and discussing things that should not be discussed with non members. Somebody will have to account for how that influence is used when you're wondering why you can't save a person. Maybe that's been a misuse of influence. And finally, we have to consider who we allow to influence us. In your social circle, do you find that the people who are talking to you, who are whispering in your ear, who are getting inside your head, do they compel you to do things that turn out to be for the good? Or do they cause you to do things that are emotional and reactionary? Rehoboam wreaked havoc in the kingdom of Israel because he did not allow himself to be properly influenced. Think about every aspect of your life. Who influences you? Is it for the good? Is it for the bad? And who do you influence? And remember, you will have to answer to God for how that influence has been used.